What's up, guys, and welcome back to Retro Gamer Gen X's Retro Gaming and Computing channel. And in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the history of Atari's 8-bit line of computers. And just like any of my other look at videos, I always throw in commercials just showing the marketing of the systems as well. And on top of that, at the end of the video, I always put in some gameplay just showing the games that these systems had. So without any further ado, guys, let's go ahead and take a look at Atari's 8-bit line of computers.
Discover a world beyond your wildest dreams. Discover Atari. Pioneers in coin video games like Centipede, Tempest, and Asteroids that challenge you, excite you, test you like never before. Discover the Atari that opened your eyes to the world's most popular home video games like Space Invaders, Missile Command, and Warlords. Discover the Atari that brought you a home computer truly designed for the home. Sophisticated for advanced needs, yet simple enough for your child to use. Compose music, play advanced games, manage your finances, all at the touch of a button. Discover Atari. And discover how far you can go.
The story of the Atari 8-bit line really starts in 1974. It was at this point where the three founders of Atari, Nolan Bushnell, Ted Dabney, and Al Alcorn, decided to acquire Cyan Engineering, an engineering firm that was founded by Steve Mayer and Larry Emmons. They brought on the engineering firm to help with arcade design, but also wanted them to help in the emerging home console market. Atari wanted to compete with Magnavox, which released the Magnavox Odyssey in 1972. So in 1975, Atari released the Pong console. At the time of its release, the Pong console had the most powerful IC that was used in a consumer product. But Atari knew this wouldn't last. Word had gotten out that Fairchild was working on a video game console that used programmable video game cartridges to where you could switch out the games on the console itself. This is a market that Atari wanted to get into. Lead engineers from Cyan Engineering, Steve Mayer and Ron Milner, started working on what would become the Atari VCS, or as we all know it now, the Atari 2600. They started searching for a suitable CPU for the system. In September of 1975, they went to the WestCon trade show in San Francisco. There they saw the 6502 microprocessor for the first time. But unfortunately, at a cost of $25 per unit, it would still be too expensive to put into a consumer product and have it still be affordable for the average consumer. This is when they set up a meeting with Chuck Peddle, the designer of the 6502 microprocessor. Over a period of 2 days, they designed the 6507 microprocessor, which was used in the Atari 2600. To keep costs down, they reduced the package size of the 6502 processor, which was a 40-pin processor, to a 28-pin DIP processor for the 6507. With the reduction of size, also reduced the amount of address lines on the processor. After the 6507 was designed, Peddle and MOS Technologies made a deal with Atari to sell not only the 6507 processor, but their newly designed Riot chip at $12 for each, making it $24 for the pair. This was a deal that Atari could not refuse, and it started a good relationship with MOS Technologies. So the last chip that really needed to be designed in-house was the graphics chip for the Atari 2600. So Atari hired on two more engineers, Joe DeCure and Jay Miner. These two engineers helped create what was called the TIA chip, or Television Interface Adapter, which became the graphics chip of the Atari 2600. By 1976, Atari had designed a working prototype called Stella But even as great as the technology seemed, the engineers for Atari warned them that this technology would be obsolete within just a few years. By late 1976, the design of the Atari 2600 was completed, and Atari engineers started designing the next generation of video game console. But by this time, Atari was facing financial issues, with the arcade division, the Pong consoles, and now the newly designed 2600, along with acquiring the engineers and the engineering firms, had cost Atari millions of dollars, and they were in debt. They needed to find an investor so they could get the Atari 2600 to market. It didn't take long for Atari to find a buyer. Warner Communications bought Atari for $28 million in 1976, but 1977 proved to be quite a different year. Consumer electronics were getting cheaper as cost of ICs were coming down. Companies like Radio Shack, Commodore, and the newly formed Apple Computer were designing their own computers and had released them in 1977. In fact, 1977 is deemed as the year of the personal computer. The Atari VCS, as it was known at the time, was released in September of 1977. As we all know, it went on to become the best-selling second-generation game console. But through 1977 and into 1978, Atari engineers kept working on the new graphics processor for a new video game system that was to be released by 1980 to 1981. But in 1978, big changes were coming to Atari. Warner Communications had hired Ray Kazier as CEO to run Atari. Once Kazier came to the company, he wanted to switch focus from making the new technology a video game console to making it into Atari's first computer. Really, he just wanted to compete with Apple, seeing how successful they were becoming. This decision caused turmoil at Atari. Many employees and engineers, including the founder, Nolan Bushnell, disagreed with this, and they wanted to continue making a video game console. However, Warner Communications and Kazier now ran the show. Development of the new computer system commenced. And it was at this time that we saw the exodus of the original Atari employees, engineers, programmers, and then the founder, Nolan Bushnell. Jay Miner, however, stayed with Atari. He had been working on a dual-chip architecture using a full 6502 processor for the new video game system, which in turn is now going to be used in the new computer. The first of the two chips is the CTIA chip, or the Color Television Interface Adapter. And really what this chip is the continuation of the development of the original TIA chip that was used in the 2600. The other chip in the design being called the ANTIC chip, or Alphanumeric Television Interface Controller. Now these two chips work together to create the graphics on the Atari 8-bit. What Atari was developing was way more advanced than anything that was on the market from Apple, Radio Shack, or even Commodore at the time. In fact, Chuck Peddle from MOS came and saw what Atari was doing at their development center and said that it was way more advanced than anything that Commodore was doing at the time. And Atari made him sign a non-disclosure statement because, as we all know, MOS was a subsidiary of Commodore, so they didn't want no trade secrets getting out. So the higher-ups at Atari wanted them to take this technology and develop two computers out of it. The first one being a low-end machine, basically a hybrid game console / computer, mainly made for kids and for video games. This system would be codenamed Candy. The second system would be a higher-end computer with expansion and ability to add more RAM and more video capabilities such as S-Video. This system would be codenamed Colleen. The names Candy and Colleen came from secretaries that were working at Atari at the time. Initially, the Candy design wasn't even going to have a keyboard. They would offer a separate keyboard you could purchase to plug into the system to use. But by 1979, Atari had seen how the computer market had grown, and they had changed the plans for Candy to become a full-fledged computer as well. They changed the design to include a keyboard, but instead of a normal keyboard, they added a membrane keyboard on it that could resist spills from children. Atari's two new computer models were shown at the 1979 Winter CES show, but their names were changed from Colleen and Candy to the Atari 400 and 800 computers. Their names representing the amount of memory they came with, 4 kilobytes for the 400 and 8 kilobytes for the 800. Both machines had expandability, with the 400 being able to be expanded up to 16K and the 800 being expandable up to 48K. The Atari 400 had one cartridge slot while the 800 had two, with both systems sharing 4 joystick ports and similar I/O ports. The two computers were released in November of 1979. The reviews were coming in and people were quite impressed with the Atari system for its price range, its graphic capabilities, software, and user friendliness, and not to mention the Atari brand being popular with consumers. Although the computers were successful, they were costing Atari millions to produce. The FCC had stiffened RF regulations, so Atari had to build these systems with robust metal clamshells around them. This and the cost of plastic raised the cost for Atari astronomically. They also found it tough to compete with established computer companies like Commodore, Apple, and Tandy. By 1981, it was reported that off of the sale of 50,000 computers, Atari lost more than $10 million. By this time, Atari knew they had to change something. They had to lower production costs. They started the design of a new 8-bit computer. Atari consulted with MOS Technology again, and they created a chip called the Sally, a customized 6502 processor. This new processor had the capability of running up to 4 MHz. All the while, they had been developing a new graphics chip called the GTIA. This new chip was able to create 256 colors as opposed to the original CTIA chip that could only do 128. The new GTIA chip was compatible with the 400 and 800 computer, so Atari offered an incentive for Atari customers. If your computer was still under warranty, they could replace that or exchange those for free. If it wasn't under warranty, you could bring it to an Atari service center and they would do it for $65. This would upgrade the older 400 and 800 computers with the GTIA chip, giving it 256 colors and supporting the newer software. There were going to be 2 computers made, one codenamed Sweet and one codenamed Liz. But the plan for the dual system launch had stopped, and they took the technologies and developed one computer, which became the 1200 XL. It was shown at the 1983 Winter CES show. The design of the system had changed. It went from the big, bulky, almost a Apple-looking computer to a more sleek, contemporary 1980s design. They also reduced the amount of joystick ports from 4 to 2, gave the computer 64 kilobytes of RAM right out the box, and it came with a better, redesigned keyboard. Atari released the system for $1,000 and were highly criticized for the price point of the computer. In fact, sales slumped and the computer just didn't do very well. Although the computer itself was actually a pretty good computer. It was just the price point that killed it. Atari knew they had to do something, and they had to do something fast to save face. So they decided to go back to the low-end, high-end model like they did with the 400 and the 800. Atari went back to the drawing board and designed 2 new computers, the Atari 600 XL and the Atari 800 XL, both of which used design cues from the previously released 1200 XL, just in a smaller form factor. The new 600 XL and 800 XL models were shown at the 1983 Consumer Electronics Show. They were slated to be released in September of 1983, but due to supply chain issues, they were having problems with production. By the Christmas season of 1983, there was a shortage of Ataris on the shelves. All the while, Commodore's products, the VIC-20 and the newly released Commodore 64, were flying off the shelves. But things at Atari were changing. By late 1983, the video game crash was in its full swing. Warner Communications was losing millions of dollars in the video game market, and with increasing competition with Commodore's C64 computer, Warner Communications was looking for a way out. Recently, there had been turmoil at Commodore as well. Commodore founder Jack Tramiel quit the company and started Tramiel Technologies. The timing was just right, and Warner found their buyer, Tramiel. Once Tramiel took over the company, his focus shifted from the 8-bit computer line to the future of 16-bit computers. With the help of former Commodore engineers, they started the design of the Atari ST computer line. Jack had been quoted as saying that the 8-bit Atari line had never been profitable for the company. Only video games had been, although Atari had sold up to 1.5 million computers to that point. All development and prototypes of any further 8-bit computers was stopped, although production of the 8-bit line was not. Tramiel wanted to cut costs and wanted to continue the 8-bit line to fund the 16-bit line. So Atari got busy designing the XE line of 8-bit computers. The Atari XE would take on new design cues, looking a lot more like the Atari ST, a more modern, updated 80s design. These computers would be the 65XE and the 130XE. The 65XE being essentially an 800XL minus the parallel bus interface, and the 130XE having 128 kilobytes of memory accessible through bank switching. It also included the ECI or Enhanced Cartridge Interface. There were also cost reductions introduced, such as the introduction of the Freddy chip, which integrated most of the discrete LS logic on the motherboard. This line of computers was released in 1985. Sales of the XE line were moderately successful, with the introduction of 16-bit computers such as the Atari ST, the Amiga, and the Macintosh, and with Commodore having the majority of the 8-bit computer line sales of Atari's 8-bits dwindled. By 1986, Tramiel was looking to offload most of the 8-bit inventory they had left. To do this, they introduced a new XE computer, or shall I say game console. The Atari XEGS was released in 1987. This was to be the last of the Atari 8-bit computers. Marketed as a game console that could be expanded into a full-blown computer, it never was very successful in either the video game console market or the computer market. Although not really a part of Atari's business model anymore, the 8-bit line did continue production until the 1990s. The XEGS continuing production until early 1991, and the rest of the XE line continuing production until January 1st, 1992, when the entire 8-bit line was discontinued by Atari. And that pretty much brings us to the end of the Atari 8-bit story. It was an amazing 8-bit computer line that brought computing to a lot of people that had never used a computer before. Selling over 4 million units in its 13-year lifespan, it was actually quite a successful computer line, with having a huge cult following and making hardware and software for it up to this day.
I hope I can talk my parents into buying me an Atari 800XL.
Well, tell them all the things it can do for you.
Right. I'll tell them it's got 256 colors and 4 sound channels.
I don't know, that's a little technical. Why don't you tell them it'll help you learn music and art?
Well, and there's integrated software for word processing, spreadsheets, forecasting.
No, tell them it'll help you write term papers.
I'll tell them it's expandable with serial link peripherals like modems and disk drives.
Tell them it's your birthday.
Oh. Hey, you guys are still here. Well, if you guys are digging the content, don't forget to hit that like, that subscribe, and that notification bell. That way you get notifications every time I drop new content like this. Well, I'm actually recording this for what you guys are about to watch coming up. So let me go ahead and get back to this, and you guys get back to the video here.
This is the Nintendo video game system. It plays only cartridge games. This is the new Atari XE system. It plays cartridge and disc-based games. Disc drive sold separately, and only Atari comes with a real joystick. Both have guns, but only Atari comes with the target game Bug Hunt. Nintendo has a toy robot, but only Atari gives you a keyboard for playing advanced computer games. It even comes with the amazing Flight Simulator 2 cartridge. The new Atari XE video game system. Unbeatable.
Game over, man. It's game over.